Hi friends, so happy you're here. Today I'm creating 3 cards using the Spring Meadow collection from Hero Arts. I'm using a lilac color theme throughout all the cards, starting out clean and simple and then building into inky layers and watercolor backgrounds. I'm using really easy techniques to get a few different looks. So let's get started and assemble these cards. I'm going to start out by doing my stamping first. I have some vellum at the bottom and then some white hammermill cardstock at the top in my Misty. I'm going to be doing some embossing on that vellum, so I added a little bit of anti-static powder to that to prevent stray embossing powder. And then I placed my 2 big images right in the center of those papers, and then I grabbed my VersaFine Clair ink. I like this ink, it stamps beautifully every time, and then you can also emboss with it. It has a good leeway time that you can add embossing powder. So I stamped those, and then I'm going to add some black embossing powder to my vellum image, tap that off, and then gently heat that with my heat tool. You want to make sure your vellum is heat resistant, and you want to keep your heat tool moving and not in one spot for too long so it doesn't end up burning your paper. For my sentiments, I'm going to stamp all of these and then heat emboss them with white. So I did prep my paper with some anti-static powder. I'm inking up the Everyday Sentiment strips 2 with some Hero Arts Unicorn White ink, which is my favorite, and I'm going to stamp that. And then I have 2 sentiments from the No One Lilac U stamp set as well. Then I'm going to cover those with some white embossing powder and melt them with my heat tool. And then once they were melted and cooled, I'm just going to trim out the bigger sentiments with my trimmer just so they're in a strip. And then for the Everyday Sentiments, they work with the sentiment strip die, so I'm just going to line those up and then secure them with some washi tape before I run them through my die cut machine. That way it won't shift. And now I have lots of sentiments to choose from, and I'm just going to use my scissors to trim them down to size and then to separate out the Everyday Sentiment strips. Perfect. So let's start working on card number 1. I'm going to use the lilac sprig that we stamped on white cardstock first, and I'm using some Distress watercolor pencils to color this with. I'm going to be using this color inspiration swatch throughout all my cards. So I chose colors based on the first 2 swatches. I am using Salvage Patina, Peacock Feathers, and Villainous Potion. I'm taking the teal colors and I'm focusing on the inside of the flower. I did the Salvage Patina first and then the darker Peacock Feather in the center, and then now I'm putting the Villainous Potion around the edges or just the tips of the flowers. And it doesn't take a lot of pigment, so I'm just coloring this on, and then when we add some water, they'll just gently blend together, so we'll get this really pretty variegated look on all the flowers. For the leaves, I'm using Shabby Shutters and peeled paint. I am drawing on the lighter color, which is Shabby Shutters first, and I'm leaving a lot of white space, as you can see, because when we blend it out with water, it'll kind of fill it in, and there'll be a nice variation. Here's a quick look at the messy coloring, which is kind of pretty, but once we add the water, it'll really blend nicely. I am using a water brush, but you could also use a brush with a cup of water. My method here is to use as little water as possible, just enough to kind of melt that pigment and allow it to kind of blend into each other. And I'm just using a scribbling motion. I don't really have any special technique for this. I'm just blending them together, but not working it so hard that we lose the definition of the 3 colors. They just kind of want to soften and melt into each other. Before I moved on to the leaves, I did clean off my brush on a baby wipe, or you could just put it in your cup of water, and then I'm going to softly blend those out, and it goes very quickly. And here's a look after it's blended with water. So pretty. Alright, we'll let that dry for a little bit and assemble our card. I die cut some more of that white cardstock with a postage stamp die, and then I'm going to ink up the birdsong script background using the coordinating distress inks in Villainous Potion and a little bit of that Peacock Feather. And then I'm just going to roll that into the corner of that die cut just so I have some partial stamping, and then I'll pop that up on my card front. I'm using the leftover piece from where I die cut out my lilac sprig, and I'll be putting this on a card later. That way I don't waste any paper. And I'm just going to pop up my flower in the corner here and then choose one of my sentiments, and I'll pop that up at the bottom of the flower. I'm going to use some skinny foam tapes on either side of that stem. That way the flower and the sentiment are on the same level and we don't get like a little bunchy area over that stem. All right, let's start working on card number 2. I'm going to be using the purple and the pink in this swatch. I have my background stamp again and my white ink, and I'm just going to ink up the center of the stamp. I have my card front at the bottom there to kind of give me an idea of how wide I need to go. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is kind of an imperfect background technique. We're just going to stamp it and we'll get what we get. It's not meant to be perfectly done. The more distressed it looks is even better. I am using some watercolor paper. This is Canson XL because we're going to be adding a lot of water and ink to our background. I'm just going to quickly melt this with my heat tool, making sure that I get all the areas and I don't miss any of those little embossing specks. And since I had everything out, I did prep 2 backgrounds just the same way for 2 different cards. Now comes the fun part where we get inky. I'm going to be using some Kitsch Flamingo Shaded Lilac and Villainous Potion Distress inks for the background. I put some shaded lilac on my silicone mat and then sprayed it with a little bit of water, and I'm going to pick that up with an acrylic sheet. I like to be able to see that ink move below it so I can smush it, tap it, and kind of see how it's applying to the paper. I'll do different methods as I move along with this card, but this is how I like to start out. It also gives me an idea of how that ink is going to look on the paper. Next, I took my blending brush and I'm going to lightly blend over the top of that. I did dry it first so I can make sure I can set those splatters. This is a very light color, so I wanted to create more of a base color and deepen that up, and using the wet ink really gives it a lovely watercolor look. Next, I'm going to add in a little bit more of that shaded lilac with a hint of that Kitsch Flamingo, kind of pick up a bit more of that pink color. And I had some water already on my acrylic sheet, so I just picked up that ink with that water so I could get some really defined kind of splotchy splatter looks. This time I added some more ink onto my mat, added some water, and I'm going to mix that ink with my fingers and then to tap in. And this is going to give me even more splattery, watery, splotchy looks. And I'm going to dry those to set those. And then come in again and layer on some more of that wet ink. Just really helps define those splotchy areas. And then last, I really want a pop of that dark purple, so I'm using Villainous Potion and I'm applying that to my silicone mat because it controls how much I'm going to apply to my paper. I can pick it up with my blending brush and then just slightly add it to areas onto my background that kind of make it pop more. And then I finished off with some really dark water splatters for a dark purple look, and then I'm going to dry that really well and set it to the side so it can dry while we work on our lilac die cuts. These were die cut from watercolor paper again, and they layer on top of each other, so I want this big lilac to be darker than my top layer. So I'm going to do my 2 purples and I'm going to do different methods to kind of add that ink onto that die cut. I started with the acrylic sheet and it just wasn't adding enough color to my liking and it was really staying watery. So I started with the tapping motion and I just want to kind of cover it all, and then we'll build off of that soft watercolor wash. And then tap on a bit more of that Villainous Potion in areas. I really want variation of ink, like it looks like watercolor, but by tapping it into these wet inks on my mat is going to build up that watercolor look. I'm just going to add some ink blending in between to kind of pop up that color, kind of catch all the edges of the watercolor splatters. And then once I have a color that I'm liking, I'm really liking how deeply purple that is, I'm going to tap on some more of that ink on top and then give it a dry. And I like that, but I do want to kind of pop in a little bit more of that purple ink. Perfect. And I'm going to give that a good dry and then move on to my top layer of the lilacs. And this I'm going to use the light purple and the pink and just tap it in. Tap it in and kind of cover it, see what we get, give it a dry, because every time we dry, it'll add another layer on top of it. I'm gonna add some direct ink blending to my die cut to really build up that color so it'll pop. And then I'll add in the tapping into the wet ink for my splatters and to really give it a watercolor look. And then finishing off with that really vibrant dark purple splatters at the end. And I really like how those turned out. I'm gonna set those aside to dry, and then we'll start working on the leaves using shabby shutters and peeled paint. I'm just gonna apply the shabby shutters directly onto the die cuts, get a nice base color, and then we'll come in and we'll add the peeled paint. I'm going to smush that onto my mat, add a little bit of water, and then we'll tap in our die cuts to get that watercolor splatter look on top. And I'm doing each piece. The leaves have two parts, the veins and the big leaf. I'm doing the veins a little bit lighter so they pop against that darker leaf background. And then the stem of the lilac, I did it kind of a darker base and then a little bit lighter at the top. I just kept tapping them until I liked the color variation that I got and how deep the color was, and then I'm just going to dry these really quickly. So now we can just assemble all these together. I'm going to glue that top piece of the lilac to the bottom, just with some liquid glue, and then glue that stem to the back. And then I'll glue the leaf veins on top of the leaf. What's nice is the die actually has a little imprint that helps line it up for you. And then I'm going to glue those leaves directly onto my card front, and then I'm going to pop up that big lilac with some foam tape and then glue the base to the card front. Loving that. And then I just need to add my sentiment to finish off card number 2. And now card number 3 will go quickly because we've already practiced with card number 2. I'm focusing on all 3 colors this time, and there's a little bit of magic on how that happens with this card and the inks. So I'm going to start building up my background. This time the acrylic sheet was really light with a salvage patina color. But those splatters are important, so we want to make sure we get those, dry them, and then we can add the ink over top, and it will really help those kind of pop out, and then we can fill in the background shape, which gives it a really pretty watercolor look. Next, I'm going to tap in some splatters with the peacock feather, and that really deepens everything up. Give that a good dry, and then we come in with Villainous Potion. And what's the magic here is this Villainous Potion has a bit of pink hidden in it. So when I ink blend that on, there's a variation of this pretty purple and pretty pink that magically happens just by adding water. And then to really make some of those areas pop, I'm going to come in and gently ink blend in some of that peacock feather directly onto my card base to really deepen it up and make those colors really pop in areas. And I love that. This is probably my favorite background of the 3. And I'm just going to finish it off with some of that Villainous Potion water splatters. Just want to make sure that's dry. And then we're going to pop up our vellum piece. I'm hiding my foam tape behind the dark stems of the embossed image. And then I'll add my sentiment again on the same level by putting the foam on either side of that sentiment strip to finish off card number 3. Once I was done with all the cards, I decided a couple of them just needed a few black pearls. Just kind of pulls those sentiments a little bit more into the design of the card. And here's a look at our final 3 cards. I just love the simplicity of this one and the two-tone delicate script background. I love how the soft vellum image looks against this colorful watercolor background and how the text peeks through. And for our 3rd card, I just really love how everything came together with the die cut. That big, beautiful lilac in the pinks and purples just really pops against the watercolor background as well. You'll find all the supplies linked below or at my dollhouse-designs.com blog. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more card making inspiration. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you again soon for another video.